Afternoon. My name's Sean Conning. I'm the co-founder of the Extra Play and Global Sports Jobs. Really pleased to be here today. I think over the past 20 years, I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to work across a number of different parts of the sports and entertainment ecosystem. Um, I started a long time ago with Compass and Levy Venues after a short career in retail, and then was lucky enough to pivot into sports data with Stats Perform. I was chief people officer of DAZN in my later years, and then went to work in another adjacency, the betting industry with Superbet. So I've been fortunate enough to work across all parts of the sports ecosystem. Today, I run the Extra Play and Global Sports. We work across talent, careers, capability, exec search, operating model projects across the sports and entertainment industry. And the main reason I was really excited about today was this conversation actually reflects my own career. And that's something we're going to talk about in today's session, which today sports doesn't sit in isolation anymore. It's increasingly sits at the intersection of media, entertainment, technology, data, culture. And that's fundamentally both changing the industry, but also the opportunities and the careers that sit inside it. So hopefully today will be really insightful, and we've got some great stories to share and two great speakers. So I'm really lucky today to be joined by two people. Firstly, Stuart Wehrman. Stuart works at Accor, looking after sponsorship and events. He spent his whole career working across sponsorship, marketing, partnerships in sports and entertainment. We'll hear more from Stuart shortly, and he'll spend some time talking about his career journey, and you'll learn more about his story to date. And secondly, also Antoine Hancourt, who's the head of course at emlyon Business School. Antoine and his team work closely with organizations across the entire industry. And their goal is to ensure that students are really developing the right skills, capability, and great reference points to enter the industry in the right way. So I'm delighted to have both of you with me. We'll get a chance to say hello. So look, before we dive into careers, Antoine, I think it's probably worth stepping back and understanding a little bit more about the big industry shift happening around sport and entertainment. So sports increasingly sits alongside entertainment, lifestyle experiences. So from your perspective, I think it'd be really good to understand how and why has sport evolved into a broader entertainment ecosystem, and what do you think the forces are that are driving this shift?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean, for this introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar. Absolutely, it's true that if you look at 20 years ago, the answer to these questions was relatively clear. Clubs, leagues, federations, sponsors, agency, the industry was relatively easy to map. Roles were well defined, and value creation was mostly linear. But today the picture no longer holds. Because sport is no longer just sport. It is content. It is culture, it is lifestyle, it is platform, and that transformation changes the entire ecosystem. If today, today you can look at sport as consumed as a narrative universe. Take Drive to Survive as an example. Formula One didn't just grow its audience; it really reframed itself as entertainment IP. The race used to be the product, but it has become one element inside a broader storytelling machine. Sport has shifted from event-based consumption, to continuous engagement. Look at formats as well, like Kings League. It blends competition for those who are familiar with these fantasy leagues, influencer culture, digital interactivity, and entertainment mechanics. So that's not just sports. That's a design experience, if I may say. So we can see that the ecosystem, is expanding. Now sport intersects with media, with tech, with lifestyle, and finance. And so boundaries between industries have become blurry. They're dissolving. If you look at Live Nation, that recently acquired Paris La Défense Arena, that one Live Nation, also owns Ticketmaster. So you pay tickets for concerts, and it's the same organization that sells, tickets for your sports event. But put it this way, Liberty Media, F1, we're talking about Drive to Survive. owns 50% of this entire, bucket. That's how we need to frame this new picture. And of course, streaming platforms, also influence, global fan engagement. Anta, you're probably not as familiar, with this name. It's a Chinese corporate that acquired Amer Sports in 2019. Amer Sports, owning itself Arc'teryx and Salomon. They have recently, taken a minor stake. Well, say it's a big stake in Puma. So this actor, from China, did not exist in the picture, and now it's probably going to reshape the global sporting goods landscape in the few years to come. So what we can see is it's like it's no longer a closed industry; it's a converging ecosystem. And so what makes this transformation even more interesting is that different actors inside these ecosystems operate under different logics. If you look at institution, IOC, FIFA, UEFA, and those governing bodies, their priority is stability, legitimacy, continuity. They want to protect, tradition and governance, and long-term credibility. But if you look at the newcomers as well, the investors and private funds, not even talking here about sovereign funds, their logic is different. They look for scalability, asset appreciation. They look for financial returns. So they have a major interest into the franchise models, media rights optimization, and so on. And through it, platforms such as the tech, Netflix, TikTok, and YouTube. Their currency is attention. Their asset is data. Their power lies into distribution and algorithmic amplification. So, once again, today's sport is no longer governed by a single logic. It sits at the intersection of institutional legitimacy, financial scalability, and platform-driven attention economics. So, and so these logic now collides, and that's we can look at it as this is where the tension lies. So finally, sport is expanding beyond its traditional boundaries. And I want to take a last example here. Take a fitness franchise change, such as Les Mills. These wellness ecosystems, subscription-based model, driven by communities. So here again, sport is it's another aspect. It's another angle. It's no longer confined to clubs and federation. It exists as urban studios, digital platform, and hybrid lifestyle spaces. So it's becoming embedded in everyday culture. So if sports now operates at the crossroad of these institution, investors, platforms, franchise, new players, from the Far East. This, is raising the question is, when it comes to building a career, what we can conclude is that, it requires more than just passion for the game. And you need to understand, as as we were right here, you need to understand governance, understand capital flows, understand media logic, and platform dynamics, and of course understand brand and cultural positioning. And I think it was important to have these few words as an introduction to make sense of what we're going to speak now. I hope I was not too long, Sean. I promised I'd do more. I'd do this in 5 minutes, so I'm under control.
I think that was great, Antoine. That's a really good baseline for the people that have joined today to step back and look at the industry and its evolution. And I think that really helped the next part of the discussion. So thank you. Quickly before I move on, we'd love to take some questions. We've scheduled to hopefully talk for around 35, 40 minutes. The Q&A function is open. So we'd love you to drop some questions in. It's always a challenge on these webinars to get the conversation flowing, but drop those in and we'll come back to them later in the session. And any sort of questions, you drop them in the Q&A or the chat if that doesn't work. So thanks, Antoine. So Stuart, I think it's a really nice segue into thinking about the careers and the opportunities that sit ahead of all of us now in this changing ecosystem. You've had an amazing career. You started in consumer PR, moved into sports sponsorship, marketing. Today, you sit in a role that really illustrates what Antoine's been talking about: joining up sport, travel, hospitality, global events, and that's the convergence we're talking about today. So, I thought it'd be really good if you spend a few minutes talking us through your career journey. It's a nice segue into understanding the industry more, but also the sort of real challenges and opportunities that lay ahead of people, and talk about the changes you've seen in sports. It's become more connected in entertainment and culture, and do it through the lens of your career today.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be on the webinar, and hopefully it's going to be helpful and informative. Yeah, as you said, I mean, I started my career in consumer PR in the very late 1990s, and I think it's fair to say the sponsorship industry was pretty young still and unsophisticated. It was fairly, as Antoine kind of said, it's before the advances in tech and platforms, etc. So it was very much, from a brand standpoint, badge and brag. It was just about just getting some exposure effectively, and the rights understanding, rights policing and protection were not really that sophisticated. I remember one of my very first jobs was actually placing competitions across UK regional press for Bell's Whiskey, where the prize was to win Premier League tickets. Now, that would never be allowed today because they don't have the rights to do that, but the clubs were actually willing to do that and hadn't got the rights protection in place to do it. So that's one example of kind of how it was back then. It was very much badge and brag, get a few tickets, do a bit of PR, and job done. I moved into a WPP media agency a few years later, and that really helped me understand how marketing works, how media actually works, how brands plan and buy their communications. And during that time, I was there for about 10 years and kind of ended up running their event sponsorships team from the UK standpoint. The advances in technology really drove that change. So you think about the advent of Facebook, the advent of mobile, some key elements that really impacted long-term sponsorship contracts, because sponsorships are often 3, 4, 5 years in length, and we were seeing tech innovation coming at such a pace that the contracts weren't able to keep up. Because I remember doing a talk with referencing Evian and Wimbledon that I worked on, and we had to just have that fluid relationship with the rights holder to say, well, look, Facebook wasn't a thing when we signed this contract, but now it is, and we need to take advantage of this. So how do we legislate for that within the contract, and how do we provide further flexibility going forward to acknowledge that more change is coming? And then after that, I wanted to go brand side, something I'd not done before, but really to understand how decisions are made from the brand's perspective and to help influence them. So I spent a number of years brand side, and really I think it's about understanding the changes in society, within marketing, within sport itself. It's really, really important, and how that influences the changing environment that we now face. So in marketing, further media fragmentation. When I started, we had so few TV channels. TV shows could dominate, right? You take 2 years ago, 93 of the top 100 broadcasts in the US in terms of viewership were NFL. It's been a massive decline in viewership of non-appointment to view TV. Right now, there's catch up and streaming and all that sort of stuff, but viewing habits have shifted. The only thing bringing mass audiences together is live events, and sport being quite a dominant part of that. So there's a huge shift in that side. We had marketing where rights holders didn't really understand how marketing works. That has started to shift. We're now seeing advanced rights holders looking at how they can support their sponsors with performance media. But now the marketing debate shifts back to kind of top of funnel brand equity and brand salience and memorability. We've seen a huge societal shift. COVID accelerated this shift from the move from goods to experiences. We call it the experience economy. Before, people used to identify with what they have. Now they identify with what they do. And so being at these events, being seen at these events, sharing their experiences is social currency. And it has completely changed the game. And so we're seeing, sales of luxury goods actually dropping in certain cases, but experiences absolutely being reinforced and growing significantly. So you will see the impact that the likes of a Taylor Swift Eras Tour has on local economies wherever she goes and plays. And it's not necessarily about Taylor Swift, it's about how she created this buzz that this is just a must-go-to event wherever you are in the world. We had people flying from America to Paris to watch her because either they couldn't get tickets in the US in the towns nearby them, or it was too expensive because the secondary market had escalated. I was at an event we sponsored, British Summertime, in 2022. This is just post-COVID. London sustained 4 major sellout concerts of the same night. There was Adele in Hyde Park. There was Guns N' Roses in the Spurs Stadium. There was Ed Sheeran at Wembley Stadium, and there was Kings of Leon at the O2. This is at the same time when Wimbledon was on, just down the road. Now, that was unheard of a few years before, that you would have so many major stars and major events absolutely sold out. And so it's been a really, really interesting area, but that has knock-on effects because fans are now demanding a much better fan experience. And this is where sports rights holders need to catch up. People are wanting a great day out or evening, and sport has now become a competitor to all other forms of entertainment. And that's important to note. So how do you make that experience compelling? And actually, it might not be about fans of the actual sport itself. It's about appealing to people who want a fantastic experience. It just so happens there's sport going on in the background, right? I think darts has done this brilliantly. If anyone's been to Alexandra Palace for the World Championships, it's phenomenal. People aren't there for the darts, they're there for the experience. And it's a phenomenal atmosphere. And I think, this is where we see more and more sport coming as entertainment, and the influence of the US model into Europe. And it's fueled because sports organizations need growth like any other business. And if you've already got your core fans, where are you going to go for that fan growth? You've got to go to adjacent areas. And how do you appeal to that? So the US sports have come into Europe. NFL have been here for 15, 16 years, been in the UK. And that also influences how other sports organizations need to adapt, because the NFL experience is totally different to a Premier League match, for example. So how are the sports adapting and evolving? And you see this with your Formula One. We talked about Drive to Survive before. It's an entertainment platform. You're fusing music, you're fusing Hollywood, you're fusing fashion. You had Tommy Hilfiger launching its partnership with Mercedes F1 team at the Milan Fashion Show during Milan Fashion Week, with putting Formula One center stage. You're getting more and more entertaining formats. I mean, there's examples. We actually helped launch our partnership with PSG with a fashion show in China. And the way that PSG embraced the cultural icon of Air Jordan. So PSG is still the only football club that has ever carried the Air Jordan mark, because it's a cultural icon and it said something lifestyle about the PSG brand. You've got that fusion of culinary and gastro with Ascot Lords integrating Michelin star restaurant dining experiences before the match, which is sometimes what people are going for over and above the actual sport. You've got the fusion of worlds, which is where individuals and their followers can add fan followers to the sports. It's estimated that Taylor Swift being at the Super Bowl the other year increased viewership by 20 million. It's extraordinary. And so this fusion really, really makes sense, because it makes sense because people are not, passions are not mutually exclusive. Every individual has multiple passions. Just because I'm into rugby does not mean I'm not into music, right? It's got to be right, but that attraction can bring other audiences into the sport and make it relevant. And an organization like SailGP is growing absolutely in this context. They're first about the fan experience. It just so happens there's a sporting competition going on the water. It's great for the core sailing fans, but it's attracting a new wave of audience who are just interested in, yes, the racing, yes, the technology, but also the experience as well on site. There's innovation in sport, which we see as a more entertaining formats. Like cricket has been a great innovator with T20 and the 100 in the UK. Formula One's even introducing this season power-ups, right? So some drivers are equating it to Mario Kart. It's not quite as that extreme, but they are playing around the edges of innovation to make the format and the sport and the product more entertaining and therefore more appealing to more people, and embracing the new world of the digital platforms to grow their audience. So you'll see streamers and YouTubers actually taking the rights, the broadcast rights in some markets of major sports. So the Bundesliga gave the Bundesliga rights in the UK to a streamer. It's the first time that's happened. Now, obviously, they're experimenting, but it's an indicator. You had Ronaldo streaming padel on his own channels and a live stream. So they're becoming media owners in their own right. And broadcasters. So I think it's a fascinating area. And the thing for me is, as technology keeps evolving, the pace of change is only going to get faster. And being across it, understanding the implications is so important, because you can then produce this amazing homogenized, integrated platform that really speaks to mass audiences.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. You brought back some really great memories for me there. I remember the first Logan Paul KSI fight back in 2019 that we streamed on DAZN, and a big realization moment for me was when we got bigger viewership on multiple platforms for the weigh-in on a Thursday night hosted by True Geordie than we did for an Inter Milan game on the Sunday.
Wow.
And that was a real moment for me of, the world's really changing. And, some great examples in there as someone that's experienced Alexandra Palace. I think, the whole sort of sport becoming more of an experiential, fan engagement led event is going to change even more over the next 5 and 10 years. I'm interested, Stuart, from a sort of leadership capability perspective, what muscles are you flexing differently than you were 5 or 6 years ago? I acknowledge your roles have changed and you've gone into bigger jobs, but you've talked a lot about the changes in the industry and consumption and media and fans, and how's that led to you flexing different muscles or playing into different spikes as a leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. With tech innovation that keeps coming at pace, you've just got to keep across it, right? And where are the brands follow attention, brands follow audiences, and so from my perspective, seeing which are the forward-looking rights holders who are creating those mass attention opportunities is really important. The data analytics and insight has become far more sophisticated, alongside measurement, becoming far more accountable, and that's increasingly what boards and brands are demanding, which is, what am I getting in return for this investment? And it's not as simplistic as what some people call ROI and misinterpret ROI. It's genuine. What are the how does it fit in and enhance my marketing communication strategy, but also what is it doing in addition to that? Governance is becoming a big thing. But when I speak to rights holders, particularly federations, the CEOs there, they are spending far more of their time on governance. So sport as and that's player welfare. That is, so you talk about things that are happening even in the NFL, right, and in football, with different historic cases of concussions and all of this sort of stuff, with athlete welfare, with organisations like British Gymnastics or or England Swimming and things like that. They're spending a lot of time on these processes. And it's important because society has moved on, right? And it's now far more important to focus on those. I think there's a degree of identifying what are fads and what are long-term shifts. So a couple of years ago, we had the so-called self-proclaimed kind of fad NFTs, right? NFTs were everywhere. It was the next thing, blockchain. Suddenly, rights holders dived in, tried to get make a quick buck. It kind of died quite down a lot, right? Well, I think one thing that Jeff Bezos says about change, he said, well, actually, tell me what's not going to change in the next 10 years. I can build a business on that, and I'll make sure that I can pivot and I can adapt when things shift in the edges. But human behavior, because it's rooted in evolutionary mindset, the basic principles of human behavior and choice don't change. So identifying that, I think, is really important. Otherwise, you can get really easily distracted by the latest shiny toy, which can burn bright for a short term, but then just quickly disappear and be replaced by the next shiny new toy.
Makes sense. Look, let's move on and try and think a little bit more around the changing employment landscape for people that are embarking on or early stage of their career in this industry. It's really interesting. I thought about my own journey before we joined today. And I think one of the interesting things about my own career, which I mentioned earlier, I started off as a retailer. I was a retailer with brands like Marks and Spencer and Kingfisher, who and Castorama and B&Q in the UK, and with a pivot into hospitality, but then moved into from hospitality into sporting events, leading teams that run the contracts at Twickenham and the Millennium Stadium, into sports data, into media and platforms, and then into betting, and then sort of back into sport. And if I'm being really honest, that wasn't a grand plan when I started off 25 years ago. But it's interesting that type of career journey now is becoming far more common in the industry, and I think a lot of that's probably linked to some of the insights that Antoine and Stuart have shared today, because as sport converges with media, entertainment and technology, I think certainly as an ex-CPO, organizations are looking for capabilities that exist both inside that traditional ecosystem of sport and indeed entertainment, but then also beyond it. Certainly in my time at DAZN, we were hiring top talent from fintechs, from technology companies, from out of the fangs that had no adjacency to sport. And I think as that happens, the industry is going to become, I think two things are going to happen. One, it's going to be far more competitive for the talent that wants to pursue a career in this channel. And secondly, it's going to improve performance and curiosity and diversity of thought as you bring those new ideas in. So I think having that in your mind as you think about what actually stands out today from an employer's perspective is really important. I did a talk recently with Leeds Beckett aimed at undergraduates, probably at a slightly early career stage, but really encouraging them to think, actually, the destination may be sport and entertainment, but it doesn't need to be the start point. Actually, sometimes that can give you a real competitive advantage over the talent pool. So Stuart, I'd love to bring you back in a little bit here to sort of build on those themes and try and make it practical for the audience. So if we think of many early career, high potential, highly capable individuals entering the sports industry or transitioning from first role to second role to third role, what do you think people are really looking for today? And I guess making it a bit practical, what have the really successful, high impact profiles look that you've brought into your teams over the last 4 or 5 years, and maybe some stories to bring that to life?
Yeah, I tend to recruit on character and curiosity are the two sort of C's that I would look at. Diversity and different backgrounds is critical, and that's not just different backgrounds in terms of work and careers, but it's also international, right? The teams that I've worked in that have been the most successful have had diverse international backgrounds, because culturally you get different thoughts. I think the sports industry traditionally back in the day, you could pretty much imagine the stereotypical sports exec profile, and you could even know what they were going to wear, right, at events like Wimbledon and Ascot and things like that. That's completely shifted. I was speaking to the former MD of Octagon, not a couple of years ago, and they relocated from West London to the city, and he said it's been incredible because he could suddenly attract that kind of East London creative media, innovation minded people, which he couldn't attract when he was in Fulham. And just the simple move of the office opened up this whole new recruitment opportunity for him. And he said the difference was incredible because the difference of thought, the difference of background, the new skills coming into the team were transformational. It wasn't just recruiting from the same small, isolated talent pool. So location even is an important one. And look, it's we don't look at fanboys. I think gone are the days where well-meaning fans of sport are getting jobs, right? There are for some federations in terms of volunteering roles because sport relies on volunteers to a large degree, particularly the federations. But in terms of professional sports careers, getting people from different backgrounds is critical, and that route in, as our parents' generations, for example, they would have one career for life. That's completely changed now. It's 4 or 5 careers during an overall career, and so moving is so much easier and so much more acceptable and so much more encouraged that actually, if we bring someone from a finance background, then actually that's quite a useful, interesting area, data and analytics. But I think there's also the soft skills that are really vital. We want people who are proactive and problem solvers. So, strong communicators, people who can simplify complex data sets, because let's be honest, AI can churn out whatever we want, and there's never been so much data available. How do you pick out the most important elements, and how do you tell the story around it that makes it compelling, that enables you to make good business decisions off the back of it? So that's a really important piece, and that resilience, because companies change all the time. The number of reorganizations my company has had, we do one every year, and being resilient is really critical. Kind of working that muscle, and being okay to fail. There was a teacher that I knew, and he would always teach his students, fail means first attempt in learning. And it's true, you actually learn a lot more from failure. I've learned a lot more from bad managers than I have from good managers as well. And I think that's a really important piece, that just because it's not getting necessarily an entry level job in sport, you can actually bring a huge amount of difference by going that round route to other industries as a stepping stone.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. I think one of the points you touched on earlier, the passion for sport angle, and people that want to work in sport and love it. I think it's a real tension point for a lot of employers, because I still think it's, in terms of engagement and purpose and wanting to be motivated with the work they do, it's still very, very important, but not at the expense of some of the things we're seeing employers prioritize, whether that's commercial awareness, data literacy, storytelling, creativity. And I think if we go back even 5 or 10 years, it was often at the expense of the others. Where now I think it's a tension we battle with a lot with our clients. I still do a lot of work with DAZN, and we're always talking about boxing roles, and you need people that can connect with boxing as a sport. And there's some truth in that, but actually, if you haven't got a great storytelling muscle, a great creative muscle, it's never ever going to work. So I think we're seeing shifts there, and I do think the industry is becoming much more open. I think certainly one of the things that I've seen trigger is increased PE investment, because I think with that investment comes a higher bar around some of the critical thinking skills of return on investment, and it's actually challenged the industry hugely.
Massively. And they want an exit strategy, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They're looking for growth and cost cutting, and how's that growth going to come? It's going to come from diverse audiences and growing that audience base.
Yeah, absolutely. And just moving on, when you think about early career high performers, and then we'll bring Antoine back in. You've touched on this a little bit, but very concisely, what separates the people that really stands out? And you mentioned curiosity, and you mentioned some of the things you look for. But if you were to leave two or three things that help people stand out from the crowd, what would your three headlines be?
Mine, curiosity, commercial acumen, and resilience.
Resilience. Yeah, I guess you were going to say that having listened. That's brilliant.
I
Thanks,
mean,
Stuart. That
if you want, just one final point on that,
yeah,
actually, particularly if you're in a commercial role at a rights holder, geez, that resilience is required, because you're gonna get no 99.9% of the time when you're doing a sales pitch.
yeah. No, I think that's absolutely spot on. Brilliant. I want to leave some time for questions. I think it would be really timely to bring Antoine back in. I'd love to bring you back, Antoine, and talk a little bit around emlyon. And if these are the capabilities and the things that organizations are looking for, we've talked about the changing landscape of the industry. Could you share a few examples of the type of work you're doing to help your students and your master's students prepare for this career, hone their skills, and maybe a few examples of where some of your alumni have gone on to do great things in the industry to bring it to life?
Yes, thank you, Sean, and thanks a lot, again, Stuart, for sharing your perspective. And I think I'm totally aligned with with this perspective. If I may just elaborate on this and get back to the question from Sean. We've lived in a linear world, in the last 80 years. What's really changing now is that we have to say it is the end of globalization as we've known it. You have China wanting to be or wanted to become not the number one nation on the planet, but to compete at the same level of the US. So what we can see is, and I think this is something that Stuart brought earlier on, we'll have to put it this way, 50% of the media rights globally are held by four people, four organizations, the four American leagues. And that's to be said. But the reality of, the sports ecosystem as a whole is shifting. We're moving away from a Anglo-Saxons and say American or Europeans sports-only perspective to a diverse, perspective. And that's, I think, what's really key for the newcomers on the market is to understand this shift as well, on a geopolitical perspective, to make sense of what's at stake in the world. Look at Accor, it's a global organization. If you don't understand, the differences, within these different parts of the world, that's going to become complicated. So I would say that beyond the qualities, and the soft skills, as we name them, there are skills as well. And geopolitics, sports, again, is one thing. And I also want to bring another perspective. It's like coming back to what we were saying in the first place. We cannot just look at the sports as a one single ecosystem, but multiple ecosystems. So there's no one good answer to this question, because if you enter it, if you work to Canal Plus, 50% of the job is going to be working on fine-tuning contract. The business model of Canal Plus, such as those, and as subscription based. Your business is to sell subscriptions. You use sport as a bait, but the reality is people are going to stay for the movies and for the series. So you have to make sense of this. If you're just a sports specialist, you can be a journalist, you can be a pundit, but you're not going to be the right person to manage the media rights, acquisitions, and sales. So yes, qualities or general qualities are important, but the reality is, because it's becoming complex, you need to be at ease with the management of contracts. You need to be at ease, because we're talking as well. And I remember Stuart's talking about innovation. Well, in this business, very essence, it's not a very innovative industry, and we've seen it. Governing bodies, they try to resist to this world which is moving fast, and so one way to innovate is to partner to create collaborations, sponsorship deals. So I would say that's the easy part. The more difficult part is to manage the exit of these partnership, of these collabs. So management of crisis is a key skills to also uh, uh, practice and train. So contract, conflict, understanding the move and the dynamics of the big picture, I think are becoming qualities. And very often we forget some of the key art skills because yes, we talk about sports business, but first of all, or entertainment business, but first of all, they are businesses driven by, figures and numbers. You need to be ease with, the financial aspect of the picture. If you need to be able to not manipulate the numbers, but be at ease with these the play with the numbers, because once again, that's at the end of the day, you always have to talk to your financial director. Money drives the business at the end of the day, and then to conclude on this, a very important bit because it's connecting to this geopolitical aspect. It's how do you manage cultures and subcultures because they, multiply. If you look at companies such as Adidas, Nike, and even Salomon, we're talking about anti-Iran, but entertainment industry the same. How can you co-create engage collaborations with subcultures? I also remember pictures from Stewart, all these collabs that they engage. So you need to also be able to embrace and collaborate with cultures that for which you don't belong to. So these understanding of the if you want to make the bridges with these subcultures, how can you connect? So I think this is another aspect of the competencies and skills that you need to train for. And of course, each and every people have to decide, to which they are better at ease. So you cannot be at ease with every types of skills at the same level. So you need to choose, and then find your way entry point to the industry, taking this into consideration. So that would be my perspective. I don't know if
Brilliant. No, thanks, Antoine. That's really good. Look, we've got a few questions coming in, so I'm going to flip to those because I think they're some really interesting ones. The first one I love actually, and it made me think of when we launched DAZN and we took the Serie A rights in Italy, and you realise that football is a religion in Italy, and it's not just a game. The first question is quite commercial. I'll come to you first, Stuart. So it's basically, how do you tackle, and it's the person that's asking the question's view, a perceived resistance in Europe to the Americanization of sport, e.g. integrating entertainment into sport. Sports usually seem to carry more cultural weight in Europe than it does in the US. Do European audiences feel it trivializes sport?
Being aware of cultural differences is critically important. I think what's been fascinating, I worked with the NFL as I came into the UK, and it was fascinating because what you saw was the NFL audience in the UK was a very, very different profile than the NFL audience in the US. It's more upper class. They can sell for, the tickets are extortionately expensive. It is an entertainment product. So it's, the Europeans were curious about it, and they would turn up with, it didn't matter which teams were playing, they would be all franchises represented in the fan base. So they were there for the sport and the razzmatazz, the entertainment, not for the teams that were playing. In America, it's like football is over in Europe, right? They are there for their team. It's much more tribal. It's much more of a blue collar sport. Obviously very mass, but it's not as so-called premium as it has been in Europe. So I think that they play different roles, and actually the Premier League in the US is the same. It's a little bit, they distinguish themselves as no. I support Premier League. I support soccer Premier League because I don't identify with these other American sports. And
Yeah.
F1 is the same. One of the heads of brand of the Mercedes team said to me that the American, this go back a few years, just as Netflix was coming out, he said F1 American F1 fans are Americans with a passport.
Yeah.
And I don't try and go back to the actual question. We're still in this phase about how much so-called entertainment European sport can take. Because I agree with you, there is an interesting tension between the core sports fans who, this is my sport, this is how it's done. I don't want Cardi B doing a show at halftime. I've not come to see Cardi B, I've come to see the final. But you have new audiences, particularly younger audiences, who have been exposed and grown up with certain American cultural references, and they do want that. They want to be entertained. So it's kind of finding that it's a tricky tightrope. I think the choice of entertainment, how it's integrated, is super important. I once went to a rugby Prem final, Bath Leicester traditional rugby audience, and they had Blue play at the halftime, which was just tone deaf, right? Just didn't work. Turned everyone off. So you've got to get it right, and I think if it's integrated in the right way, it can work. But I think the European approach has been to make the sport product itself more entertaining through law changes, through formats, through all of that sort of stuff. And then you're building around that rather than saying we're going to shove Taylor Swift in at half-time for a concert that no one's asked for.
And I think it's interesting where sports coexist as well. If we look, I don't know if you've been to a live golf event, Stuart, compared with the PGA one, and the whole atmosphere and the vibe and the feel essentially totally based around the same sport. It's completely different. And you'd almost argue it's appealing to a completely different audience. And then the other obvious example, which is close to my heart, is comparing Misfits boxing with a traditional fight card again. And there's lots of examples, whether it's Kings League versus football. So I think that audience part's interesting as well. And you can probably deal with those entertainment pivots better where there's a reimagining of the sport somewhat, because actually you're attracting a new audience rather than trying to convert an old one.
Exactly.
I think it's quite like interesting. That. Yes, absolutely.
Cricket is exactly like that.
Back to careers, lovely, really practical question from Barbara. So for young people wanting to break into the industry, what would you recommend, Stuart, in terms of that tension? And I think you'll probably say all three, between building qualifications and theoretical knowledge, experience, developing softer skills.
And research, using all tools possible, right? There's some wonderful free resources, or there's also courses available, introduction to sponsorship. I sit on I'm a board director of the European Sponsorship Association. There's tons of materials, case studies, documents, guides that are free to download, free to access. But they also run a number of really great educational courses at all levels of the industry. So a really good resource there. I put Sporsora up there. That's the French Sports Marketing Association. So similar, it is all in French, but you can get that translated as well. There's a lot of resources there. And subscribe and follow these people. It depends which industry, which routine you want to go, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it is finance, whether it is data and management. There's so many different areas, but be curious and kind of absorb loads of different things. This is a podcast that is about the sports business internationally, and it's just a fascinating listen. And there are many others as well, the business of sport, that I'd encourage people to just dive into, learn about the industry, what type of roles there are, and see where you fit most, and then backfit that in to where to get the experience, either directly or through an adjacent business in industry that can provide a stepping stone in.
Yeah. And I think, Barbara, coming back to the difference between the three, I think that the knowledge and the insight you can get from working towards a qualification is an incredible sort of bedrock or foundation to build on. However, the students that really stand out are, I think, the ones that supplement that with the things Stuart's just talked about. Whether that's internship opportunities, being curious about content out there. So I don't think it's an either or, but I think that the working towards a qualification just gives you a great foundational start point, and you work with some great lecturers like the team at emlyon. There's lots of great institutions around Europe, and they'll give you that good insight.
So, and who are the thought leaders in the industry that you should just follow? Right, on LinkedIn, it's when I started, there was none of that available.
There's so much
none of it was available. There's so much free stuff that's available online through LinkedIn, through people now sharing a lot of stuff for free that just simply wasn't available even 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. You just need to go. You just go on Spotify, and there's some fantastic sports podcasts on there now. Whether it's leaders, or I listen to the Unofficial Partner podcast quite a lot. There was a great session with Simon Daniel, who's an old boss of mine, a few weeks ago. There's loads. There's just so much out there now. If you're curious and you're interested, and I think that's the insight that will separate you, because it starts to make a lot of theoretical work much more practical. And it's not a shortcut to experience, but it's a shortcut to some of the insight you'd get from experience by listening to people that have been on similar journeys.
True. There are companies that do internships as well, so there are internships out there that have evolved quite well.
Yeah. Two more quick ones, and then I think because I want to leave time to wrap up at the end. But I think Graham's question's a great one. For a 20-year career in public service leadership, where they've led teams, managed risk, operated in complex, high-stakes environments, what's the most effective route into the sports sector at a mid to senior level? Is it worth investing in formal conversion through programs like an MSc in sport or business, or is it more realistically driven by networks, relationships, and demonstrating relevance in adjacent roles? So, Stuart, I'll come to you first. I can jump in afterwards.
And it depends what target role you want to go for, right? Because if it's a finance role, if you've got finance background, the sports body won't care. It's not been from a sports background. They'll just see the finance side of it. So my advice would be to actually go and speak to a couple of recruiters to say, look, I'm looking to go in this area. These are my skill sets, but this is the target type of role within a sports organization. Maybe it's a stepping stone to something else within the sports industry, but to make that adjacent move, being really clear where that sits. And those recruiters will have they recruit for for different types of roles across the sports ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think, Graham, looking for adjacencies, your last point is really important. So public sector leadership, obviously that could manifest in a number of different ways, but there's quite a bit of
would be great for that. Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, federations, organising committees, major events. There's a massive adjacency there, Graham, depending on what part of public service you've been in. I think Stuart's advice on agencies is great. It's quite a disparate market in the UK and Europe. But a bit of research. You've got your Elevate, your Excel Sports Management. We do some work at mid-level. You've got Hodges, executives in sport, Darren. ChatGPT will be your friend, and a few of those guys may give you some insight. I certainly wouldn't put you off the sort of fact, but it's the same as the previous answer. That, if I'm being really honest, I think that foundational masters will equip you better, and it will give you more of an armory when you get into a process. Absolutely. On its own, it's probably not going to win you a job. It's probably a mix of all of them. Flex that network muscle, look for the right adjacencies, invest in your own growth. But I think I'd say the adjacencies is the big point.
The network part is really important as well.
Network part's really, really important. So, look, that's fantastic. So, look, thank you so much for your time today. Loads of learning. I was going to try and summarize, but I think there's too much to summarize. I think the big takeaways for me are, Stuart's points around curiosity, resilience, and the changing face of the industry. Really, really important. I think the point around having different experiences in different types of organizations and, giving you a much better head start for some of the roles is quite an important one as well. I'd like to thank Antoine and emlyon for today and facilitating this session to happen. It's been a real pleasure working with the team at emlyon. You can learn more about their programs. They have an incredible website that talks about all of their masters and their sports entertainment practice, which is really, really important. And certainly for those of you at the entry level of your career, our platform has a huge number of internships on there. The great news is we're modernising it, and we'll be launching a new platform in the summer, which will have much more volume and much better UX. But the platform there today has lots of internships on and early career jobs, and it's a good way to look at the type of opportunities out there. So look, thanks again for your time. It's been a real pleasure. Antoine, Stuart, any closing comments?
Well, thank you very much once again, for organizing this webinar. A quick word, on my side. If you're considering, entering and joining this industry, never forget that it's not just one single industry. Don't think of just clubs, and look at Stuart. Is working for a I would say, I don't know how you describe Accor as a group of hotels. It's a big corporate, but there are multiple entry points. But the reality is, the sport used to be the big or the main product, and now it's just an ingredient, and you have multiple ways to tackle this field, and multiple sets of skills and qualities that can be beneficial for your career. So never forget about this. Don't look at just the obvious. And if you ever have an interest, we're happy to also welcome students with different backgrounds, in our programs, whether they come from political science, engineering schools as well, because we strongly believe that that's also the future of the business. I want to say the diversity of backgrounds, personalities, and skills and competencies, and that's the diversity is really the driver of success. So that would be my last point here.
Thanks, Antoine. Stuart, you can have the last word.
For me, just good luck with it. It's a fabulous industry to work in. I have to be honest with you. It is great, really thoroughly rewarding. If you're interested in sponsorship, do look in the European Sponsorship Association, which the link was there in the previous one, so sponsorship.org. There are those courses. Introduction to Sponsorship. We also run the industry's only professional qualification in sponsorship, which is the ESSA diploma, and there are scholarships available each year as well for those from sort of more disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to help those get into the industry as well. So do take a look, and good luck.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time. I hope you all have a great rest of the week.